3 a.m. The world is quiet, but your mind is wide awake. If this sounds familiar, you are not alone. In today's video, we're going beyond the science to follow Barbara on an emotional journey as she learns to transform nights of anxious wakefulness into a source of peace. If you're ready to uncover her story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can continue to bring you more meaningful content. Now, let's begin. For the 17th consecutive night, Barbara O'Neill was wide awake. The silence in the house was a heavy blanket, amplifying the cold emptiness of the space where her husband, Thomas, used to sleep. Her well-ordered life had been invaded by this nightly chaos, and all her remedies, warm milk, counting sheep, had failed. The next afternoon, her exhaustion bled into a phone call with her daughter, Chloe. "You sound tired, Mom," Chloe said, her concern feeling like an accusation. The conversation was tense, and Barbara's frayed nerves were obvious. Alarmed, Chloe took control. "I've made an appointment for you with a new doctor. It's on Thursday." The intrusion felt like a betrayal of Barbara's fierce independence. She was not a child to be managed, but the sleepless nights had worn down her defenses, and she was too tired to fight. "Fine," she conceded, the word tasting like defeat. "I'll go." She agreed not for herself, but to appease Chloe and prove she was perfectly capable. Yet a sense of dread settled over her. It wasn't a fear of being sick, but a fear of being seen, of a stranger looking past her carefully constructed composure and seeing the cracks that were forming in the lonely silence of the early morning. The doctor's office was sterile and modern, and Dr. Reed was alarmingly young. Barbara sat stiffly, feeling out of place. She had come for a solution, not a conversation. "I simply require something to help me sleep," she stated, expecting a quick prescription. Instead, the young doctor listened patiently before leaning forward. "Mrs. O'Neill, I don't think you have a disease. I think your body's clock has simply shifted. It's a common change as we age, called an advanced sleep phase. Your body thinks 3 a.m. is dawn." He spoke of hormones and rhythms, but Barbara's frustration grew. It all felt like a dismissal of her very real suffering. "That's all very interesting, doctor," she said coolly, "but what I need is a pill. Before we try medication, I'd like you to try something else," he said, his expression earnest. "A powerful tool for resetting your internal clock." He paused, and Barbara braced herself. "I want you to sit in the sun for 15 minutes, first thing in the morning." Barbara stared at him, utterly speechless. Sunlight. For the terror that haunted her nights, he was prescribing sunlight. The suggestion was so simple, so infuriatingly patronizing, that she felt a flush of anger. "You want me to sunbathe?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "Think of it as light therapy," he replied calmly. "The strongest signal you can send your brain to anchor the day. Try it for a week." She left the office feeling foolish and dismissed, clutching a leaflet with a cartoon sun on it. That night, she woke at 1 minute past 3 in the morning, as always. But the next morning, driven by a defiant mix of spite and desperation, she took her tea onto the porch. As the pale morning light washed over her, she felt ridiculous. She would prove this young doctor wrong. Yet, as she moved through her day, she noticed something odd. The thick fog of fatigue that usually clouded her afternoons felt thinner. She wasn't rested, not by a long shot, but she was slightly less exhausted. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible shift, but it was enough to plant a confusing seed of doubt in her mind. The subtle improvement in her daytime energy was a double-edged sword. It gave Barbara a sliver of hope, which made the subsequent nights even more cruel. On the 5th night of her sunlight ritual, the governor of the early morning returned with a new, terrifying form of torment. She woke to the familiar red glare of the clock, 1 minute past 3 in the morning. But this time, something was different. A presence. In the deep shadows of the hallway, just beyond her open bedroom door, a figure was standing. It was tall and broad-shouldered, a perfect silhouette against the faint moonlight filtering through the landing window. It was Thomas. A strangled gasp caught in her throat. Her heart didn't just pound, it seized, a painful, freezing clench in her chest. For a paralyzing second, she was utterly convinced he had come back to her. "Thomas," she whispered, the name a fragile, hopeful prayer. Her hand, trembling violently, fumbled for the lamp switch. With a click, the room was flooded with a soft, yellow light, and the hallway was empty. She sat bolt upright, the sheets pooled around her waist, her breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts. It wasn't him. Of course, it wasn't him. It was a trick of the light, a phantom limb of her grieving mind. But the image had been so clear, so real. The terror it left behind was cold and sharp, and it did not fade with the darkness. Sleep was now impossible. Her bed was no longer a place of rest, but a stage for hauntings. Driven by a fear that eclipsed her pride, she broke a cardinal rule. She reached for her tablet on the nightstand, the bright screen an assault on her eyes. Tapping, waking up at 3 a.m. into the search bar, she fell headfirst into a rabbit hole of articles and forums. She read about the delicate chemistry of sleep, how the body's production of melatonin, the hormone of darkness, plummets with age. Then she found what she was looking for: cortisol, the stress hormone, the body's natural alarm clock. In a healthy sleep cycle, it rises gently to wake you in the morning. But in older adults, or those under stress, it could spike erratically, jolting the system into a state of high alert in the middle of the night. Suddenly, Dr. Reed's lecture didn't seem so condescending. This wasn't just in her head, it was in her blood, in her hormones. These were the ghosts that haunted her body, invisible chemical specters that opened her eyes and summoned apparitions in the hall. The knowledge was both a comfort and a new source of anxiety. As she puttered around the house the next day, the silence felt different, charged with a new loneliness. She found herself speaking to Thomas, a habit she had suppressed since the funeral. "Oh, Thomas, you wouldn't believe the nonsense this doctor told me," she murmured while watering the plants. But perhaps he wasn't entirely wrong. That afternoon, Mr. Henderson waved her over to the fence, his face alight with excitement. He held up a strange, silvery object. "Barbara, my dear, I've found the ultimate solution. A magnesium-infused, ionically charged sleep mask," he announced proudly. "Blocks out all negative energy frequencies. Cured my own night terrors in a single evening." She looked at the ridiculous contraption and felt a profound weariness. There were no magic masks, no easy cures. Her problem was deeper, woven into the very fabric of her body and her loss. That night, she lay in bed. The memory of Thomas's silhouette burned into her mind and waited for the ghosts to arrive. The early morning hour was no longer just an appointment with wakefulness. It had become a tribunal. As soon as her eyes opened, her mind, supercharged with cortisol, would begin its relentless interrogation. The anxieties would start small and then spiral, each one feeding the next. Did I remember to lock the back door? That noise. Is it the furnace? It sounds strange. It's going to break down in the middle of winter. I just know it. Chloe sounded so stressed on the phone. Is she happy in her job? Am I a burden to her? I should have made Thomas go to the doctor sooner. That cough. Why did I let him convince me it was just a cold? The thoughts were a swarm of angry bees, and in the crushing silence of the night, there was nowhere to hide. The darkness amplified every fear, transforming minor concerns into catastrophic certainties. One rainy afternoon, searching for old tax documents, she found herself at Thomas's desk. It was a space she had largely avoided, a perfectly preserved museum of his life. In the back of the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of old maps, her fingers brushed against something small and leather-bound. It was a journal. She didn't even know he kept one. His neat, architectural handwriting filled the first page. January 12th. The doctor used the word serious today. I didn't tell Barbara. Her heart stopped. She sank into his chair and began to read. For the rest of the day and deep into the night, she was consumed by his words. The journal wasn't just a record of his illness. It was a collection of his love for her, his private fears, his regrets, and his profound sadness at the thought of leaving her alone. "She is so strong, my Barbara," he wrote near the end. but she hates being fussed over. I worry that she'll try to carry all this sadness by herself. I just hope she remembers to let someone in. The sun was rising by the time she read the final entry. She had cried until her body ached with a raw, hollow grief she hadn't allowed herself to feel since the funeral. She hadn't slept a single minute. The journal was a gift and a curse, a final conversation that had shattered her completely. The following night, the exhaustion was so profound, she fell asleep the moment her head hit the pillow. But the respite was brief. At 15 minutes past 3 in the morning, her eyes shot open. The grief, the anxiety, and the sleep deprivation converged into a monstrous wave that crashed over her. Her chest grew tight, a powerful vice squeezing the air from her lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, erratic and wild. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. This was it. This was what a heart attack felt like. She was dying, alone in this silent house. The thought propelled her out of bed. Stumbling to the bathroom, she gripped the cold porcelain of the sink, her reflection a pale, terrified stranger. She splashed her face with icy water, the shock of it a lifeline. Gasping, she focused on her breath, forcing air into her starved lungs. Slowly, agonizingly, the vice on her chest loosened. The panic receded, leaving in its wake a chilling, bone-deep exhaustion and a new, terrifying fear. She was no longer just afraid of being awake. She was afraid of the night itself. The carefully curated order of Barbara's life began to fray. The lack of sleep was a corrosive acid, eating away at her competence and her confidence. One morning, her hands trembling with fatigue, she overwatered her prized collection of orchids, drowning the delicate roots in a fatal flood. She stared at the limp, dying flowers and felt a sense of failure, so immense it was nauseating. They were just plants, but they were her plants, a small world she had controlled and nurtured. Now, even that was beyond her. Worse was the lunch date. Her oldest friend, Margaret, had been her rock since Thomas's passing. Barbara had written their lunch date in her calendar, but the entry simply vanished from her sleep-starved mind. She was an hour late when Margaret called, her voice a mixture of worry and hurt. "Barbara, is everything all right? I've been waiting." The shame was a hot flush that spread from her neck to her face. She had stood up her best friend, an act of carelessness she would have found unforgivable in anyone else. The final straw was the online banking. A property tax bill was due. She sat at Thomas's desk, staring at the screen, the numbers swimming before her eyes. She initiated the transfer, her tired mind transposing two numbers in the account details. It was a small error, but one that sent the payment into a digital void. The realization of her mistake the next day was a cold dread. She, Barbara O'Neill, the meticulous librarian, had become incompetent. That Saturday, Chloe arrived unannounced. She used her key and found Barbara still in her dressing gown at noon, staring blankly at a cold cup of tea. The house, usually spotless, was in disarray. Newspapers were scattered on the floor, dishes were piled in the sink, and the dead orchids sat in their pots like a grim monument to her failure. Chloe's carefully controlled concern finally broke. "Mom, look at this place. Look at you. You're not taking care of yourself." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and painful. "I am perfectly fine," Barbara snapped back, her voice rising. "You can't just barge in here and pass judgment." "This isn't judgment, it's fear." Chloe's voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes. "I call you, and you sound like a zombie. I come over, and it's like you're fading away. That doctor was useless. You need help." "Oh, what I need," Barbara said, her voice trembling with a year's worth of repressed grief and frustration, "is for you to stop treating me like a senile old woman. This is my house and my life." The words, once spoken, could not be taken back. The chasm between them yawned, wide and silent. Chloe fled in tears, the front door slamming shut, its echo a gunshot in the quiet house. Barbara sank into Thomas's armchair and finally, completely, fell apart. The phone rang 2 days later. It was Dr. Reed. "Hello, Mrs. O'Neill. I'm just calling to see how you're getting on with the morning light therapy." His calm, professional voice was so at odds with the chaos of her life that something inside her broke. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, wounded sound. And then the dam burst. She told him everything. The figure in the hall, the panic attack, the dead orchids, the fight with Chloe. She told him about her crushing loneliness and her terror of the coming night. He listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just listened. When she finally fell silent, her voice hoarse from crying, he spoke, his tone gentle. "Barbara," he said, using her first name for the first time. "It sounds like you're carrying a very heavy load. The sleeplessness isn't the problem. It's a symptom. Let's try something else. It's not a pill, but it might help with those racing thoughts. Keep a notebook by your bed. When you wake up, turn on a small light and write down every single worry in your head. Don't edit, don't judge. Just get it out of your mind and onto the paper. It's called a brain dump. Let's see if we can give those thoughts somewhere else to go instead of your mind." A notebook. It was another simple, almost foolish-sounding suggestion. But coming after his quiet empathy, it didn't feel patronizing. It felt like a lifeline. The fight with Chloe was the harsh, cold shock Barbara needed. It was a mirror held up to her own decay, and she did not like the reflection. Her confession to Dr. Reed, in turn, had not been a moment of weakness, but a release. She realized she could not simply endure this nightly siege. She had to fight back. She had to become the librarian of her own recovery, researching and implementing a new system for living. That evening, she declared war. The television, with its flickering blue light and stressful news reports, was switched off at 8 p.m. sharp. She dug out Thomas's old classical music collection, and the quiet, structured beauty of Bach filled the house. She went from room to room, dimming the lights, creating a soft, warm environment that whispered of rest. She bought thick, velvet, light-blocking curtains for her bedroom, transforming it from a moonlit stage into a dark, quiet cave. On her nightstand, she placed a brand new, empty notebook and a smooth, flowing pen. It felt like laying out weapons for a coming battle. That night, when she woke at 21 minutes past 3 in the morning, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach, she didn't lie in the dark. She followed Dr. Reed's instructions. She switched on her small bedside lamp and opened the notebook. The first words were hard to write, but then they started to flow. "The house feels so empty without him. I'm terrified of being a burden to Chloe. I miss the weight of his hand in mine. What if I never have a full night's sleep again?" She filled 3 pages, her handwriting a messy scrawl. When she finally put the pen down, she felt a strange sense of quiet. The worries hadn't vanished, but they had been transferred. They were no longer a chaotic swarm inside her head. They were linear, black and white sentences, captured and contained on the page. She also tried the 4-7-8 breathing he had mentioned on his leaflet, inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 7, exhaling for 8. It felt awkward at first, a forced, unnatural rhythm. But she stuck with it, focusing on the count, on the sensation of air filling and leaving her body. She fell back asleep an hour later. The next day, she baked an apple pie using Thomas's old handwritten recipe. She drove to Chloe's apartment and left it on her doorstep with a simple note. "I'm so sorry, Mom." Chloe called that evening. Her voice was soft, stripped of all anger. "I'm sorry too, Mom. I've just been so scared. After losing Dad, the thought of losing you." "You're not losing me," Barbara said, her own voice thick with emotion. "I've just been lost, but I'm trying to find my way back." They talked for over an hour, a real conversation, full of the honesty they had both been avoiding. Chloe admitted her fear was making her controlling. Barbara admitted her pride was making her push everyone away. A fragile bridge was rebuilt between them. This was her new life, a collection of small, deliberate actions. The morning light, the quiet evenings, the breathing, the notebook, they were not a magic cure. They were an arsenal of small weapons, and with them, she was slowly, painstakingly, reclaiming the night. 2 weeks later, Barbara woke with a start. The room was still dark, but a different quality of darkness. A pre-dawn grayness was beginning to seep through a tiny crack in her new curtains. Her first thought was a familiar pang of disappointment. She had woken up. But then, she glanced at the clock. 12 minutes to 5 in the morning. She stared at the numbers, her heart giving a hopeful leap. She had slept for nearly 5 straight hours. She had slept past the 3 o'clock tyrant, past the 4 o'clock witching hour. It was a victory so profound it felt like a miracle. Instead of feeling frustrated at being awake, she felt a quiet surge of triumph. She got out of bed, went downstairs, and made herself a proper breakfast of toast and eggs. She sat on her porch, eating slowly, and watched the sun rise not as a chore, but as a reward. Her entire perspective on the night began to shift. She was making a truce with her wakefulness. If she woke now, she no longer fought it. There was no panic, no frustration. She would simply get up, go downstairs, and make a cup of chamomile tea. She'd sit in Thomas's armchair and read a chapter of a book under a soft, low-wattage lamp. She would return to bed only when a natural drowsiness returned, sometimes after 20 minutes, sometimes after an hour. She was no longer a prisoner in her bed. At her next checkup, Dr. Reed smiled as he reviewed the sleep journal she had meticulously kept. "Barbara, this is fantastic progress," he said, genuinely impressed. "You've done the hard work." They talked about other small factors. He reviewed her chart. "You know," he said, tapping his pen on his chin, "the blood pressure medication Dr. Miller prescribed for you, you're taking it at night, correct?" She nodded. "It has a mild diuretic effect. It's probably not the main culprit, but it could certainly be contributing to your nighttime awakenings. Let's try switching it to the morning and see what happens." It was another small piece of the puzzle, another logical, practical adjustment. As she left his office, she felt a growing sense of peace. The house was still quiet at night, but it was a gentle quiet now, not a menacing one. The following week, she saw Mr. Henderson wrestling a large, lumpy bag out of his car. "Barbara," he called, his face flushed with effort. "You'll never guess. It's not magnesium masks, it's onions. You sleep with a raw, sliced onion under your pillow, absorbs the nocturnal toxins right out of the air." Barbara smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson, but I think I've found what works for me." She felt secure in her own methods, in the small arsenal she had built for herself. She was the one in charge now. Spring arrived in Silver Creek, with a gentle, determined persistence, coaxing green shoots from the cold earth and painting the sky in softer shades of blue. Several months had passed since the night of the panic attack. Barbara woke slowly, surfacing from a deep, dreamless sleep. She stretched, feeling a pleasant, settled ache in her limbs. The light in the room was bright. With a sense of calm curiosity, she glanced at the clock. 41 minutes past 6 in the morning. A profound, quiet joy filled her. The tyrant was gone. The governor of the early morning had been deposed, his reign of terror replaced by a gentle, negotiated peace. Her sleep wasn't perfect every single night. Some nights she still woke for a short while, but the fear was gone. It had been replaced by acceptance and a toolkit of strategies that gave her back control. She went to her porch, cup of tea in hand. The morning sunlight she had once faced as a grim duty now felt like a warm, welcome embrace on her skin. She looked out at her garden, where the first crocuses were pushing their way toward the light. She reflected on the long, dark winter of her insomnia. It had been a painful, terrifying journey, but she could see now that it had been a necessary one. It had forced her to stop running from the depth of her grief, to tear down the walls she had built around her heart. It had shattered her pride, and in doing so, allowed her to mend her precious relationship with her daughter. It had forced her to learn how to care for herself again. That Saturday, Chloe arrived for their regular breakfast date, her arms full of seedlings. They spent the morning together in the garden, their hands in the cool soil, planting new life where the dead orchids used to be. Their conversation was easy and light, punctuated by comfortable silences. Barbara knelt back, admiring their work. She felt present. She felt energetic. She felt, for the first time in a very long time, hopeful. She was no longer a prisoner of the night or a ghost in her own home. She was a woman in her garden, feeling the warmth of the sun on her back, watching new things grow. The night had taken so much from her, but in the end, it had given her an unexpected and precious gift, the simple, profound gratitude for the light of a new day. Thank you for joining us for Barbara's journey. Her story is a reminder that even in our quietest struggles, there is hope, and that small, consistent steps can lead us out of the darkness and back into the light. We hope this story has brought you some comfort and insight. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you again soon.